On Christmas Day, my son discovered that I was sitting on a $20 million fortune while he was drowning in debt, and instead of asking for help, his wife locked the doors and told me I was not leaving until I signed it all over to her. But they forgot one thing. I did not build a construction empire from nothing by being soft. If you have ever been underestimated by your own family, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you are watching from, because this is going to be a bumpy ride. My name is Harold Foster, and for the last 5 years, I have lived like a ghost. I drive a rusted Ford pickup truck, I wear flannel shirts from the thrift store, and I live in a small cabin 2 hours north of Chicago. To my son Jason and his wife Tiffany, I am just a retired carpenter who barely scrapes by on Social Security. They do not know that I sold Foster Construction for a sum that would make their heads spin. I kept it quiet because I wanted to see if they loved me or for my wallet. This Christmas, I got my answer. The blizzard outside was howling against the windows of their suburban McMansion, a house they bought to impress people they do not even like. Inside, the air was so thick with tension, you could cut it with a knife. We were sitting at the dining table, and the turkey was dry. Jason was staring at his wineglass like the answers to his financial problems were floating at the bottom of the Merlot. Tiffany was scrolling on her phone, tapping her manicured fingernails against the glass screen. I cleared my throat and reached under my chair. I pulled out a small wooden box wrapped in brown paper and slid it across the white tablecloth toward my granddaughter Mia. She is 10 years old, and the only person in this house who looks at me without calculating my net worth. "Open it, sweetie," I said softly. Mia tore the paper. Inside was a set of hand-carving chisels. I had made the handles myself out of black walnut wood from a tree on my property. They were polished smooth and oiled to perfection. I spent 3 weeks making them because Mia told me last summer she wanted to learn how to carve birds like I do. Before Mia could even smile, Tiffany reached over and snatched the box. She looked at the tools like I had just handed her a dead rat. "What is this?" she sneered, holding up a chisel by the tip. "Sharp objects, Harold. You brought dangerous sharp objects into my house for a 10-year-old. "It is for carving," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She has the hands for it." "It is garbage," Tiffany spat, tossing the box back onto the table with a clatter. "It is cheap, dangerous garbage. We bought her an iPad Pro. That is what kids want, not dirty tools from your shed." I looked at Jason, waiting for him to defend me, or at least defend his daughter's interest. He just sighed and poured himself more wine. "Tiffany is right, Dad," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "We appreciate the thought, but we do not want Mia getting hurt. Besides, we are a little stressed right now. The mortgage rate adjusted and the car payments are killing us." He was doing it again. The subtle beg. The hint that poor old Dad should reach into his empty pockets and hand over his last dime. I cut a piece of the dry turkey and chewed slowly. "If you lived within your means, son, you would not be stressed," I said calmly. Tiffany let out a harsh laugh. "Means? What would you know about means, Harold? You live in a shack. You have worn that same jacket for 6 years. You do not have a clue what it costs to maintain a lifestyle in this neighborhood." I was about to tell her that I built half the neighborhoods in this state when the doorbell rang. It was jarring over the sound of the wind. Jason got up to answer it. A moment later, he came back shivering, shaking snow off his shoulder, holding a thick envelope. "FedEx guy," he said. "Poor guy is out in this storm. He said this was forwarded from your old address, Dad. The mail forwarding service must have routed it here because of the weather alert." He handed it to me. It was a thick blue envelope with a gold seal. I knew exactly what it was. It was my quarterly statement from the private trust bank in Zurich. I reached for it, but Tiffany was faster. She snatched it from Jason's hand before I could touch it. "Give that back, Tiffany," I said, and my voice dropped an octave. It was the voice I used to use on job sites when contractors tried to cut corners. She ignored me. She was looking at the return address. Private Wealth Management, she read out loud. Her eyes narrowed. Why is a broke old carpenter getting mail from a private wealth bank in Switzerland? It is a mistake, I said, standing up. Give it to me. She ripped the tab. Do not open that, I warned her. She pulled out the summary sheet. Her eyes scanned the page and then they stopped. Her mouth fell open. She blinked once, then twice. Then she looked at me, and her face was not just surprised, it was twisted. It was ugly. 21 million, she whispered. What Jason asked, confused. She looked up at him and then back at the paper. She started screaming. $21,450,000. She threw the paper at me. It fluttered down and landed in the gravy boat, splashing brown sauce onto the white table. You liar, she shrieked. You filthy liar! You have been sitting on $20 million. Jason grabbed the paper. His hands were shaking. He read the number and looked at me like I had just stabbed him. Dad, he croaked. Is this real? I picked up my napkin and wiped a spot of gravy off my sleeve. Yes, I said. I sold the company 5 years ago. I invested the proceeds. It is my retirement. Retirement, Tiffany yelled, slamming her hands on the table, causing the silverware to jump. We are drowning. Jason drives a leased BMW that we cannot afford. I have to shop at outlet malls. We are in debt up to our eyeballs, and you are hoarding $20 million like some kind of dragon. I looked her dead in the eye. I gave Jason $200,000 10 years ago to start his business, I said. He blew it on vacation homes and bad investments. I bailed you out twice. This money is the fruit of 40 years of sweating in the sun and freezing in the snow. It is mine. You tricked us, Jason said, and his voice was full of self-pity. You let us think you were poor. You let us feel sorry for you. I let you show me who you really are, I corrected him, and I have seen enough. I stood up and grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. I picked up the box of chisels from the table. Mia, I said, looking at my granddaughter who was shrinking into her chair, terrified. Grandpa loves you. I will see you soon. I turned to walk to the front door. You are not going anywhere, Tiffany hissed. I stopped and turned back. Excuse me, you are not leaving this house, she said, and her voice was low and dangerous. Not until you write us a check. Not until you fix this. You owe us. You owe your son. I owe him a lesson, I said. And he is getting it right now. I walked to the heavy oak front door. I reached for the handle. Jason, stop him, Tiffany screamed. Do not let him walk out that door with our money. I heard a chair scrape against the floor. I turned around just in time to see my son, my own flesh and blood, rushing toward me. He did not look like the boy I taught to ride a bike. He looked desperate. He looked weak. He lunged past me and slammed his hand against the deadbolt, twisting it shut. Open it, Jason, I said. No, Dad. He was breathing hard, smelling of wine and fear. You cannot just drop a bomb like that and leave. We need to talk. We need to settle this. There is nothing to settle, I said. Unlock the door. Tiffany walked up behind him. She stood there, arms crossed, a cruel smile playing on her lips. The roads are closed anyway, Harold, she said. The storm is getting worse. You are staying right here, and we are going to have a long conversation about family and sharing. I looked at the locked door and then at the two people standing between me and my freedom. I realized then that this was not just a family argument. This was a hostage situation. Fine, I said, taking off my coat and throwing it onto the bench. We can talk. But you are not going to like what I have to say. Tiffany laughed. Oh, I think I will. Because you are not leaving this house until I get what I deserve. She grabbed Jason's arm and pulled him toward the kitchen, whispering furiously in his ear. I watched them go. Then I looked at the heavy deadbolt on the door. They thought they had trapped a helpless old man. They did not know they had just locked themselves in with the man who built the foundations of this entire town, and I knew exactly how to dismantle a house brick by brick. I stood my ground in the hallway, the echo of Tiffany's demands bouncing off the vaulted ceiling of the house I knew they could not afford. The air was thick with greed, a palpable thing that tasted metallic in my mouth. I looked at Jason, who was still blocking the door, his hand hovering near the deadbolt, his eyes darting between me and his wife like a trapped animal. "Move, Jason," I said, my voice low and steady, the same tone I used to use when firing a dishonest foreman. Tiffany stepped forward, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. She was not done. She was just getting started. "You are not walking out of here to go hide in the woods with that money," she spat, her face flushed with a mix of rage and adrenaline. "Do you have any idea what it is like to live paycheck to paycheck while you sit on a fortune, you selfish old man?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that seemed to startle them both. "Selfish," I repeated. "Let me tell you about selfish. Selfish is building a construction empire from the ground up, brick by bloody brick, working 16-hour days in the freezing rain and the scorching sun, missing birthdays and anniversaries, so that my family would never know hunger. Selfish is selling that empire 5 years ago, not because I wanted to quit, but because I was tired of the sharks, the lawsuits, and the people who only saw a dollar sign when they looked at me. I took a step closer to Tiffany, and she instinctively took a step back. "I sold Foster Construction to retire in peace," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "I wanted to live my final years without people asking me for handouts. I wanted to know who my real family was. I wanted to know if my son would visit me in a cabin with a wood stove, or if he would only come calling if I lived in a penthouse. And for 5 years, Jason, you barely called. You visited twice. Once to ask for a loan, and once to drop off Mia because your babysitter canceled." Jason looked down at his shoes, shame coloring his cheeks, but Tiffany was immune to shame. "That does not matter now," she snapped. "We are family. You have $20 million rotting in a Swiss bank. We need it. Write the check, Harold. Write it now, and maybe we will let you go before the storm gets worse." I looked her dead in the eye and delivered the truth that had been brewing in my gut for the last hour. "This money is for the people who deserve it," I said, my voice cold as the ice on the windows. "It is for people who know the value of hard work. It is for people who have integrity. And Tiffany, that is not you. You will never see a dime of my sweat and blood. Not one single dime." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bridge burning, the structure collapsing into the river below. I saw the calculation in Tiffany's eyes shift from negotiation to something much darker. I turned back to Jason. "Open the door, son. Do not make me ask you again." Jason looked at his wife, searching for permission, but she was staring at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. When he did not move, I reached out and shoved his hand away from the lock. He was younger than me, but he was soft. He stumbled back, surprised by the strength that still lived in my old muscles. I threw the deadbolt open and pulled the heavy door inward. The wind hit me instantly, a physical blow of snow and freezing air that swirled into the warm hallway. "I am leaving," I shouted over the roar of the wind. "Do not follow me." I stepped out onto the porch and slammed the door behind me, cutting off the sight of their desperate, greedy faces. The cold was biting, stinging my exposed face, but it felt clean compared to the atmosphere inside that house. I buttoned my coat tight and lowered my head against the blizzard, trudging down the steps toward the driveway where my truck was parked. My old Ford, the one I had driven for the last 10 years, was just a dark shape under a mound of fresh snow. I reached into my pocket for my keys, my fingers stiff with cold. All I wanted was to start the engine, turn on the heater, and drive until I was back in my cabin far away from this madness. I reached the driver's side door and brushed the snow off the handle. I unlocked it and pulled it open, tossing my small bag onto the passenger seat. I climbed in the familiar smell of old leather and sawdust, comforting me for a split second. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life, reliable as always. I put it in reverse and eased off the brake. The truck moved an inch and then stopped with a strange, lurching thud. I frowned. I gave it a little more gas. The engine revved, but the vehicle felt heavy wrong, like it was dragging an anchor. I cursed under my breath and opened the door. I leaned out, looking down at the tires. My heart hammered against my ribs. The rear tire was not just flat. It was shredded. Deep, jagged gashes tore through the thick rubber, the kind of damage that does not happen from a nail or a sharp rock. This was deliberate. This was violence. I jumped out of the cab, ignoring the snow soaking into my boots. I ran to the front tire. Slashed. I ran to the other side. Both tires were flat, ruined, destroyed by a heavy blade. I stood there in the howling wind, looking at my crippled truck. It was not just an inconvenience. It was a message. They had done this. While we were eating that dry turkey, while I was giving Mia her carving tools, someone had come out here and butchered my truck to make sure I could not leave. It was Jason. It had to be. That was why he had been in the garage earlier looking for wine. He had trapped me. My own son had trapped me like a rat. Dad. The voice came from the porch. I spun around. Jason was standing there, framed by the light from the open front door. He was wearing a thin sweater, his arms wrapped around himself, shivering. He looked pathetic. He looked like a man who had sold his soul and was now realizing the price was too high. "The storm is really bad, Dad," he shouted over the wind, his voice cracking. "You cannot drive in this. Look at your truck. It is not safe." I stared at him, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "You cut my tires," I yelled back. "You destroyed my truck." No, he stammered, taking a step back as if my anger could physically hurt him. It must have been the ice, or vandals. "We have had kids messing around the neighborhood. It does not matter. You cannot leave. You will freeze out here." He was lying. I could see it in the way he would not meet my eyes. I could hear it in the tremor of his voice. But he was right about one thing. I could not leave. The nearest town was 10 miles away. The roads were buried under a foot of snow. My phone was in my pocket, but I knew without looking that there would be no signal in this storm, or perhaps they had a jammer. I was stranded. "Come inside, Dad." Jason pleaded, extending a hand. "Just for tonight. We can call a tow truck in the morning. Please, you are going to get hypothermia." I looked at the dark road, then at the ruined truck, and finally at the warm, lit doorway where my son stood. I had no choice. Survival instinct kicked in. I could not stay out here. I would be dead by morning. I grabbed my bag from the seat and slammed the truck door shut. I walked back up the driveway, every step a struggle against the snow and the weight of my own disappointment. I walked past Jason without looking at him. He smelled of fear and expensive cologne. I stepped back into the hallway. The warmth of the house washed over me, but it brought no comfort. It felt suffocating. Jason hurried in behind me. He pushed the heavy oak door shut, sealing out the storm. Then I heard it, the sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Click. It was the sound of the deadbolt sliding home. But it was followed by another sound. The metallic scrape of a key turning in the lock, and then the jingle of that key being pulled out and shoved into a pocket. I turned around, slowly. Jason was standing there, his hand in his pocket, breathing hard. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw no regret in his eyes, only a desperate, terrified resolve. "I am sorry, Dad," he whispered, "but Tiffany is right. We need to settle this tonight. I looked down the hallway. Tiffany was standing at the entrance to the kitchen, leaning against the doorframe. She was holding a glass of wine, smiling. It was the smile of a predator who knows the cage door is securely fastened. "Make yourself comfortable, Harold," she said softly. "You are going to be here for a while." I stood there, water dripping from my coat onto the floor, realizing with a cold clarity that the man who built skyscrapers and bridges, the man who commanded hundreds of workers, was no longer a guest in his son's home. I was a prisoner, and the ransom was $20 million. I hung my heavy wet coat on the rack and turned to face them. The atmosphere in the living room had shifted so drastically, it felt like I had stepped into a different house. The aggression was gone. The jagged edges of Tiffany's rage had smoothed out into something soft and trembling. She was no longer the predator blocking the door. She was suddenly a fragile bird, her shoulders hunched, her hands clasped together in a plea for mercy. She walked over to where I stood and sank to her knees on the Persian rug. It was a performance that would have moved a stone to tears, but I am not a stone. I am concrete and rebar. I watched her mascara streak down her cheeks. Black rivers of sorrow that seemed a little too perfectly timed. "Oh, Harold," she sobbed, reaching out to clutch the hem of my trousers. "We are so sorry. We did not want to do this. We did not want to lock you in. We are just terrified. Please, you have to understand. We are desperate." I looked at Jason. He was sitting on the edge of the sofa, his head in his hands, mimicking the posture of a man broken by the weight of the world. He looked up at me, his eyes red and watery. "Tell him, Tiff," Jason croaked. "Tell him the truth. We cannot hide it anymore." Tiffany took a ragged breath and looked up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "It is not just about debt, Harold," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It is about our lives. It is about Mia." That name cut through my defenses. Mia, my granddaughter, my reason for breathing. "What about Mia?" I asked, my voice sharpening. "Jason made a mistake," Tiffany cried. "A horrible mistake. He tried to invest in a venture capital deal to pay off the house to give us a better life. But the people he borrowed from, they are not banks, Harold. They are monsters." She paused to let the words sink in. Monsters. "He borrowed money from a syndicate," she continued, the words tumbling out now. "Loan sharks. The kind of people who break legs first and ask questions later. We owe them $5 million, and the deadline is next week. They called us yesterday. They said if we do not have the money by Monday, they said they would take Mia." She buried her face in her hands and wailed. Jason let out a sob that sounded like a wounded animal. I stood there, feeling the blood drain from my face. The thought of anyone hurting a hair on Mia's head made my stomach churn with a primal, violent nausea. For a split second, the grandfather in me took over. I wanted to pull out my checkbook. I wanted to transfer every cent I had just to make sure that little girl was safe. $5 million was a quarter of my fortune. But what was money compared to Mia's life? I looked at my son. He was nodding, tears streaming down his face. "I am so sorry, Dad," he wept. "I just wanted to be a success like you. I wanted to make you proud. And now I have doomed us all." It was the perfect trap. The guilt, the fear, the appeal to my legacy. It was almost a masterpiece of manipulation. But then the dust settled in my mind, and the builder in me woke up. The man who negotiated contracts with steel unions and navigated city zoning laws for 40 years started to ask questions. I looked at the weeping woman on the floor, and the broken man on the sofa, and a cold sliver of doubt pierced my heart. $5 million. That number bothered me. It was too round, too clean, and it was too high. Loan sharks are predators, yes, but they are also businessmen. They do not lend $5 million to a failed salesman with a leased BMW and a mortgage he cannot pay. There is no collateral. There is no leverage. It did not make sense. You lend $5,000 to a desperate man, maybe 50 grand. But 5 million, that is corporate money. That is institutional money. I took a step back, disengaging my leg from Tiffany's grip. I walked over to the fireplace and warmed my hands, buying myself a moment to think. I watched the flames lick the soot-stained bricks. Who are they? I asked, keeping my back to them. What are their names? Tiffany stopped crying for a microsecond before ramping it up again. We do not know, she sobbed. They just call themselves the group. They are Russian, I think, or Albanian. It does not matter, Harold. They are killers. I turned around slowly. My face was impassive. I had worn this same face across poker tables and boardroom tables for decades. If they are professionals, I said calmly, then there is paperwork. There is a promissory note, a lien on the house, a digital trail. Even criminals keep ledgers. Show me the demand. Show me the text messages. Show me the proof of the debt. The room went silent. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. Jason looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked at the floor. They do not leave paper trails, Jason stammered. It was all verbal, over burner phones. I narrowed my eyes. So you handed over your personal information, your address, and the safety of your daughter. Based on a phone call, I said. And you took $5 million in cash. Where is the money, Jason? If you borrowed it to invest, where did it go? Did you lose $5 million in a month? Jason opened his mouth and closed it like a fish out of water. He looked at Tiffany for help. It is gone. Tiffany snapped her voice, losing its tremor and gaining a sharp edge of irritation. The investment failed. It was a crypto scheme. It vanished. Does it matter where it went? The point is we owe it and they are going to kill us. Are you going to stand there and interrogate us while your granddaughter is in danger? She was good. She pivoted back to the emotional blackmail instantly. But she had made a mistake. She got angry too fast. A terrified mother does not get annoyed when you ask for details. She gets desperate to prove the danger. Tiffany was just annoyed that I was not following the script. I need a moment, I said, pressing a hand to my forehead. I felt a genuine headache coming on, a throbbing behind my eyes, brought on by the toxicity of this room. We do not have a moment, Tiffany hissed, standing up. We need that money transfer initiated now. Banks are closed tomorrow. We need to set it up online tonight. I cannot think with you screaming at me, I said, my voice rising just enough to startle them. I need to use the restroom. I need to wash my face. Then we will talk about the transfer. I saw the greed flash in their eyes. They thought they had me. They thought I was wavering, that I was just an old man needing to process the horror before capitulating. Go, Jason said, standing up and ushering me toward the hallway. Go wash up, Dad. Take your time. We will get the laptop ready. I walked down the hallway, my steps heavy. I passed the kitchen and turned into the small powder room tucked under the staircase. I went inside and locked the door. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run loud and cold. I stared at myself in the mirror. My skin was gray, my eyes tired. I looked every minute of my 70 years. But behind the exhaustion, my mind was racing. $5 million. Crypto scheme. Loan sharks. It was a lie. I knew it in my bones. But I needed to know what the real truth was. I needed to know why they were desperate enough to hold me hostage. I looked around the small bathroom. It was decorated in expensive wallpaper that was peeling slightly at the corners. Cheap glue. Just like everything else in their lives. Then I looked up. High on the wall near the ceiling was a decorative ventilation grate. It was an old-fashioned return air vent. When my company built this subdivision 15 years ago, I insisted on using metal ductwork for better airflow and longevity. I knew exactly how these houses were plumbed and wired. I knew that this particular vent shared a main trunk line with the kitchen ventilation system. I turned off the faucet. The silence in the bathroom was absolute. I climbed up onto the toilet seat, wincing as my bad knee protested. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the grate. At first, I heard nothing but the low hum of the furnace. Then I heard footsteps, heels clicking on tile. Tiffany was in the kitchen. I held my breath. I heard the beep of a phone being dialed. Then Tiffany's voice, clear as a bell, echoing through the aluminum ductwork. "He is buying it," she said. Her voice was not fearful. It was triumphant. It was cold. Pause. "Yes, I know," she continued. "He is an old fool. He thinks it is the mob. I told him 5 million. That covers the shortage and leaves us plenty to disappear." Another pause. She laughed. It was a sound that chilled my blood. "Don't worry, babe. The audit isn't until Monday morning. As soon as he signs the transfer, I will wire the funds to the corporate account to cover the tracks and then wire the rest to the Cayman account. We will be on a plane to Paris before they even unlock the office doors." I gripped the edge of the vent, my knuckles turning white. Audit, shortage, corporate account. The pieces slammed into place like a sledgehammer. There were no loan sharks. There was no bad investment. Tiffany was an embezzler. She was a thief. She had stolen money from her company, probably millions, to fund this fake lifestyle, the cars, the house, the clothes. And now the bill was due. She needed my money not to save Mia, but to save herself from prison. And Jason. Did he know, or was he just a pawn in her game, believing the lie about the loan sharks? Just as I was supposed to. I heard Jason's voice, then muffled, coming from the living room. "Tiffany, is he okay in there?" "He is fine," Tiffany said into the phone. "I have to go. Just get the plane tickets ready. One way." She hung up. I climbed down from the toilet, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I sat on the closed lid of the commode, my hands shaking. It was worse than I thought. They were not just greedy. They were criminals. And I was the only thing standing between Tiffany and a life sentence, which meant she was dangerous. Desperate people do desperate things, but a cornered criminal with a plane ticket is a different breed of animal entirely. I looked at the door. I knew I had to go back out there. I had to play the part. I had to be the confused, scared father who was ready to sign. Because if they knew I knew the truth, I would never leave this house alive. I let Jason guide me up the stairs, his grip on my arm gentle but firm, the touch of a jailer who hates his job but fears his master more. He didn't speak. He couldn't look me in the eye. The shame radiated off him in waves, but shame is a useless emotion when you are an accomplice to extortion. He led me down the hallway to the guest bedroom at the far end of the house. It was a sparse room decorated with generic art and furniture that looked like it came from a catalog. It had no soul, much like the rest of this house. "I'm sorry, Dad," Jason whispered as we reached the door. His voice cracked. She's just scared. The stress, it changes people." I turned to look at him. He was trying to rationalize the monster downstairs, trying to fit her into the box of the wife he thought he knew. "That woman downstairs isn't scared, Jason," I said, my voice low. "She's calculating. And you need to ask yourself why she's so desperate for $20 million when she told you the debt was 5. Jason blinked, confusion clouding his teary eyes. "Interest," he mumbled. "Fees. You don't know these people." "I know people," I said, "and I know when numbers don't add up. Open your eyes, son, before it's too late." He shook his head, backing away, as if my words were physically painful. Just rest, Dad. Please. I'll bring you some water. Just think about signing. For Mia. Please." He pushed me gently into the room and closed the door. I heard the lock click. Then I heard the heavy sound of a chair being wedged under the knob from the outside. He was taking no chances. I stood in the center of the dark room, listening to his footsteps retreat down the hall. I was alone. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, a reminder of the medicine now grinding away in the disposal downstairs. But I forced my breathing to slow. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. I walked to the window. It was a double-hung vinyl unit, standard contractor grade. I peered out. The blizzard was raging, a white curtain of snow that obscured everything beyond the yard. We were on the second floor, a good 15-foot drop to the concrete patio below. Jumping was out of the question at my age. I'd break a hip or worse. I tried the latch. Locked. Not just locked, but jammed. I looked closer. A thick bead of clear construction adhesive had been run along the sash. They had glued it shut. Tiffany had been planning this. She hadn't just reacted to the bank statement. She had prepared this house as a holding cell long before I arrived. I checked my pockets. My phone was gone, burned in the fireplace. My wallet was empty of cash stripped by Tiffany earlier. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and my belt. My belt. I undid the buckle. It was a heavy, solid brass buckle, rectangular with sharp corners. I had worn it for 20 years. It was a tool as much as an accessory. I walked back to the window. The glass was double-paned, tough to break without noise, and breaking it would let the freezing storm in, killing me faster than the lack of pills. But the frame was wood encased in cheap vinyl. I pressed the edge of the brass buckle into the seam where the vinyl casing met the drywall. I pushed hard. The drywall crumbled slightly. I worked the buckle like a pry bar. I knew how these houses were framed because I was the one who taught the crews how to do it. There was a rough opening gap between the window unit and the studs, usually filled with shims and spray foam. If I could expose that gap, I could find the nail flange. I worked methodically, ignoring the ache in my fingers. I chipped away the plaster, exposing the plastic flange. I needed to get this window out whole, or at least open enough to squeeze through. Suddenly the doorknob jiggled. I froze. I quickly slid the belt back through my loops and leaned against the wall, hiding my handiwork behind my back. "Dad?" It was Jason's voice, muffled by the door. I brought you a sandwich. I'm going to slide it under the door. It's flat." I smashed it a bit. A smashed sandwich. That was what my son had to offer me. "Keep it," I said. "I'm not hungry." "Dad, please, don't be like this." "Like what? Like a prisoner?" I asked. "Go away, Jason. Unless you're opening this door, I have nothing to say to you." Silence. Then footsteps walking away. I waited a full minute, then went back to the window. I had cleared enough drywall to see the screws holding the window in place. They were Phillips heads. I looked at the prong of my belt buckle. It was too thick. I needed a tool. I looked around the room. The lamp numb. The bed frame. I knelt down. The bed was a cheap metal frame. I felt the slats. They were held in place by screws, but the edges of the metal supports were thin. I grabbed one of the metal slats and pulled. It groaned. I pulled harder, putting my back into it. The cheap metal bent, then snapped with a sharp twang. I held the piece of metal in my hand. It was jagged sharp. Perfect. I went back to the window. I used the jagged metal edge to scrape the adhesive out of the screw heads. Then, using the corner of the buckle again, I managed to get purchase on the first screw. It was slow, agonizing work. My wrists burned. But the screw turned. One turn. Two. It took me an hour to get the 4 screws out of the left side of the frame. The wind howled outside, masking the small noises I made. My chest felt tight, a dull pressure building behind my sternum. I ignored it. I thought about Mia. I thought about the look on Tiffany's face when she flushed my pills. Rage is a potent fuel. Finally, the window unit was loose on one side. I pushed. The adhesive seal cracked. A draft of freezing air hissed into the room. I pushed harder. The entire window frame shifted. I could create a gap large enough to squeeze through. But then what? The drop was still lethal. I looked out again, squinting through the snow. Below the window, about 4 feet down and to the right, was the roof of the sunroom. It was a sloped shingle roof covered in ice and snow. If I could drop to that, I could slide down to the edge, which was only 8 feet from the ground. A snowbank had drifted up against the side of the house there. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was a way out. I took a deep breath. The cold air stung my lungs. I was about to push the window fully open when I saw a flash of light against the snow. A floodlight had clicked on in the backyard. I shrank back against the wall. Below, the back door opened. Jason walked out onto the patio, huddled in his coat. He was holding a baseball bat. He looked around, nervously scanning the yard, scanning the tree line. He was patrolling. He was making sure the prisoner didn't escape. "I hate this," he muttered, his voice carrying up to me in the swirling wind. "I hate this so much." "Stop whining and watch the perimeter," Tiffany's voice shouted from the kitchen door. "If he gets out, we go to jail." "Jason, do you understand jail?" "I know," Jason yelled back, gripping the bat tighter. "I'm watching." I watched my son pace back and forth in the snow, a weapon in his hand, guarding his own father. My heart broke then, truly and finally. The boy I raised was gone. Fear had eaten him alive. I couldn't go out the window. Not with him down there. He might not want to hurt me, but if Tiffany screamed at him, if he panicked, a swing of that bat could kill me just as dead as the fall. I needed a distraction. I needed to draw them away. I looked around the room again. My eyes landed on the smoke detector on the ceiling. It was a hardwired unit with a battery backup. An idea formed. It was desperate, but I was out of options. I dragged the chair over to the center of the room. I climbed up, my knees protesting. I reached up and twisted the detector. It popped off the mount. I pulled the battery out. Then I looked at the wires connecting it to the house's power. Red, black, white. I climbed down. I went to the bedside lamp and ripped the cord out of the wall. I used the sharp metal slat to strip the insulation off the ends of the lamp cord, exposing the copper wire. I climbed back up to the smoke detector. I carefully twisted the exposed copper of the lamp cord to the red and black wires of the detector's harness. I was creating a short circuit. Not enough to start a real fire, hopefully, but enough to trip the breaker, and more importantly, enough to trigger the system's alarm. But I didn't want the alarm to just sound here. I needed chaos. I remembered the neighbor's house. The lot sizes here were small. The neighbor's house was only 20 feet away. Their bedroom window faced mine. I went back to the window. I pushed it open, fighting the wind. The cold was brutal. I grabbed the heavy glass base of the bedside lamp. I waited until Jason turned the corner of the house out of sight for a moment. I leaned out. I wound up my arm. I threw the heavy glass lamp base with all the strength I had left. It sailed through the snowy air, a dark missile against the white. Crash! It smashed through the neighbor's upper window. The sound of breaking glass was sharp and loud, cutting through the wind. Immediately, lights flicked on in the neighbor's house. A dog started barking furiously. "What was that?" Jason shouted from below, running back into view. At that exact moment, I touched the exposed wires of my rigged contraption together. Spark. A bright blue flash popped at the ceiling. The circuit breaker blew with a loud pop that I felt in my teeth. The lights in my room, and likely the whole upstairs circuit, went dead. And then the smoke alarm system, sensing the fault and the power loss, began to scream. Beep, beep, beep. It wasn't just my room. The alarms were interconnected. The whole house erupted in a deafening, piercing shriek. "Fire!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, banging on the door. "Fire, help!" I heard Tiffany screaming downstairs. "Shut it off! Jason, shut it off!" "I can't!" Jason yelled, panic in his voice. It's the whole system! Outside, the neighbor's window opened. "Hey, what the hell is going on over there?" a man shouted. "You threw a brick through my window." "Call 911!" I screamed out my open window. "Call the police, they're holding me hostage, help!" "Dad!" Jason shouted from the yard, looking up at me, his face pale in the floodlight. "Dad, shut up, shut up." "He's crazy!" Tiffany yelled, running out into the snow in her heels. "He's having a dementia episode. Don't call anyone." But the neighbor was already on his phone, looking from the broken window to the screaming old man and the chaotic scene below. "I'm calling the cops!" the neighbor yelled. "Don't move!" Tiffany looked at the neighbor, then at me, then at Jason. The siren of the smoke alarms was still blaring, a chaotic soundtrack to her unraveling plan. "Get him down here!" she screamed at Jason. "Get him into the basement! Now before the cops come!" Jason ran for the back door. I heard his heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs. He wasn't coming to save me. He was coming to hide the evidence. I jumped down from the chair. I grabbed the heavy metal bed slat I had snapped off. I stood facing the door. The chair wedged under the knob was strong, but Jason was younger and panicked. The doorknob turned violently. The door shuddered as he threw his shoulder against it. "Dad, open the door. Stay back, Jason." I warned, my grip tightening on the makeshift weapon. "I'm not going to the basement." Thud. The door cracked. The chair legs scraped against the floor. He was breaking in. I backed up to the open window. The sirens were audible now, faint, but getting louder. Real sirens. Police sirens. I had to hold him off for 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes. The door splintered. Jason burst into the room, chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. He saw me by the window, the metal bar in my hand, the freezing wind whipping my hair. "Dad, please," he begged, stepping over the broken chair. "You have to hide. If they find you, if they hear you, I'll go to prison." "You made that choice, son," I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. "You chose her over me. You chose money over your father." He lunged for me, not to hit me, but to grab me, to silence me. I didn't swing the bar. I didn't have to. I just stepped aside. Jason slipped on the wet floor where the snow had blown in. He crashed into the wall, stumbling. "The police are here, Jason," I said, pointing out the window where blue and red lights were now flashing against the snowy trees down the street. "It's over." He stopped. He looked out the window. He saw the lights. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He put his head in his hands and began to sob. "It's over," he repeated. But I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because Tiffany hadn't come upstairs. And a rat is most dangerous when the trap finally snaps shut. I walked back into the living room, trying to keep the tremor out of my hands. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt dangerous for a man my age, but I pushed the physical discomfort aside. The knowledge of what Tiffany really was sat heavy in my gut like a stone. She was not just a greedy daughter-in-law, she was a criminal, cornered and desperate, and that made the air in the room feel thin and combustible. Tiffany was pacing in front of the fireplace, her heels clicking a sharp staccato on the hardwood floor, while Jason sat slumped in the armchair, staring into the flames with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked like a man waiting for the executioner, but he did not realize he was the one holding the axe. I sat down on the sofa, moving slowly, pretending to be more frail than I was. I needed them to underestimate me. I needed them to see a tired old man, not the builder who could spot a structural flaw from 50 yards away. My hand slid into the pocket of my cardigan. The metal of my smartphone was cold against my skin. It was my only lifeline. I knew Stan Kowalski never turned his phone off. He was an old military lawyer, a man who slept with one eye open, and if I could just get a message to him, a single code word, he would bring the cavalry. Bluebird. That was the word. We had agreed on it years ago, when I started liquidating the company assets, a safeguard, in case the sharks ever circled too close. I waited until Tiffany turned her back to pour herself another drink. Jason was lost in the fire, his eyes glazed over. I pulled the phone out, shielding the screen with my body. My thumb hovered over the messaging app. I did not need to look to find Stan's name. It was pinned to the top. I typed BLU. Harold put that away. Tiffany's voice cracked like a whip. I froze. I had not seen her turn around. She was staring at me from across the room, her eyes narrowed into slits. She did not look like a mother or a wife. In that moment, she looked like a guard tower searchlight. I am just checking the time, I said, keeping my voice level, though. My pulse was racing. You do not need to know the time, she snapped, setting her glass down hard on the sidebar. You are not going anywhere. Hand it over. I gripped the phone tighter. No, I said. It is my property. Jason. Get the phone, she ordered. She did not even look at him. She just issued the command like he was a dog she expected to obey. Jason blinked, shaking his head, as if waking up from a bad dream. He looked at me and then at her. Just give it to her, Dad, he said, his voice thick with exhaustion. Please do not make this harder than it has to be. I am not the one making this hard, Jason, I said, pressing my back against the sofa cushions. I am the one trying to stop you from making a mistake you cannot come back from. Tiffany marched over to him and shoved his shoulder. He is texting someone, you idiot, she hissed. If he contacts his lawyer or the police, we are finished. Do you understand? We go to prison, Jason. I go to jail and you end up on the street. Get the damn phone. Fear galvanized him. The mention of prison cut through his drunken haze. He stood up unsteadily and walked toward me. He was a big man, soft around the middle now, but he still had the height I gave him. He loomed over me, casting a shadow that blocked out the Christmas tree lights. Give me the phone, Dad, he said, holding out his hand. I looked up at him. I looked into the eyes of the boy I had raised. I remembered the day he was born, how small he felt in my hands, how I promised to protect him from the world. Jason, listen to me, I said, keeping the phone tight against my chest. Do you remember your 10th birthday? He frowned, confused by the sudden shift. What? You wanted that red Schwinn bicycle, I said. The one with the chrome fenders. It cost $100. We did not have a lot of spare cash back then because I was pouring everything into the new site. But I worked overtime for 3 weeks straight laying brick until my hands bled so I could buy you that bike. Dad, stop, he said, wincing. I remember teaching you to ride it. I continued, my voice gaining strength. I ran behind you, holding the seat for 2 miles, until I knew you had your balance. I let go and I watched you fly. I was so proud of you, Jason. I was proud because you kept getting back up every time you fell. I stood up slowly, forcing him to look me in the eye. I taught you to be a man who stands on his own 2 feet, I said. I taught you that a man does not take what is not his. I taught you that family protects each other. Look at you now, son. Look at what you are doing. You are threatening your own father for a woman who has lied to you every single day of your marriage. Jason's face crumpled. For a second, I thought I had reached him. I saw the tears well up in his eyes. I saw the little boy who used to wait for me by the door when I came home from work. But then Tiffany spoke from behind him. He is manipulating you, Jason. He is sitting on $20 million while we drown, and he is telling you stories about a bicycle. He does not love you. If he loved you, he would help us. He is laughing at you. Her voice was poison, and it worked. The softness in Jason's face hardened into something brittle and ugly. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. Give it to me, he shouted. I struggled. I am 70 years old, but I am strong. I held on, but he was younger and he was desperate. He twisted my wrist, forcing my fingers open. Pain shot up my arm. Let go, Dad, he yelled. He ripped the phone from my hand. I gasped, clutching my wrist. Jason looked at the phone in his hand. The screen was still glowing with the unfinished message to Stan. He saw the name. He saw the letters, BLU. "He is calling his lawyer," Tiffany screamed. "Destroy it!" Jason looked at me. There was a moment of hesitation, a final flicker of conscience. "Do not do it, son," I pleaded. "That is my connection to the world. That is my safety. If you destroy that, you are crossing a line. You are not just a bad son, you are a criminal." "Bose dunglam kokon," he whispered the words sounding foreign and strangled in his throat. "Bo chikan kitoi." He turned toward the fireplace. The logs were blazing orange and yellow, putting out a heat that suddenly felt like the fires of hell. "No," I shouted, lunging forward. Jason pulled his arm back and threw. He did not just toss it, he threw it with all the anger and frustration of his failed life. The phone sailed through the air and landed right in the center of the flames. I watched in horror. The plastic case began to melt instantly, bubbling and turning black. The screen flickered once, a bright flash of white light, and then went dark. My lifeline was gone. My connection to Stan, to safety, to the outside world, was burning to ash in front of my eyes. "You fool," I roared. "You stupid fool!" I ran toward the fireplace, not thinking, just reacting. I grabbed the iron poker from the stand. I was going to rake the phone out. I was going to save it. But Jason stepped in my path. He put his hands on my chest. "Sit down, Dad," he said. I tried to push past him. "Move, Jason." He shoved me. It was not a gentle push. It was a shove meant to stop an enemy. He put his weight into it. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on the edge of the thick rug. My arms windmilled, trying to find purchase on the air, but there was nothing to hold on to. I went down hard. My hip hit the floor first, sending a shockwave of pain up my spine that stole the breath from my lungs. My head snapped back and struck the floorboards with a dull thud. The room spun. Black spots danced in my vision. I lay there on the floor, gasping for air, staring up at the ceiling. I could hear the crackle of the fire devouring my phone. I could smell the acrid scent of burning lithium and plastic mixing with the smell of pine needles. I looked up. Jason was standing over me. His hands were still raised in the pushing motion. He looked at his palms as if they belonged to someone else. He was trembling violently. I expected him to help me up. I expected him to fall to his knees and apologize. But he did not. He lowered his hands slowly. He looked at me lying there helpless and in pain, and then he looked at his wife. Tiffany walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good job, baby," she said softly. "Now he knows we are serious." Jason looked back down at me. The regret I had seen earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, empty mask. He had crossed the line. He had used violence against his own father, and the sky had not fallen. The lightning had not struck him. He realized in that moment that he had the power. I lay on the floor, looking up at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, and I realized something too. The son I loved, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, was dead. The man standing above me was a stranger who was willing to hurt me to keep his secrets. And as the pain in my hip throbbed in time with my heartbeat, I knew that the time for being a father was over. I had to survive this night not as a parent, but as a man fighting for his life against two enemies who just happened to share my last name. I woke up on the floor of the living room with the taste of blood in my mouth and the cold winter sun streaming through the windows. It was Christmas morning, the day that was supposed to be filled with tearing wrapping paper, and the smell of cinnamon rolls was instead filled with the throbbing ache in my hip and the silence of a house held hostage. I pulled myself up onto the sofa, wincing as my joints protested. I had spent the night drifting in and out of consciousness, listening to the wind howl and checking the hallway every hour to see if Jason was still standing guard. He was not there now. I heard voices coming from the kitchen. They were raised, sharp, and angry. "You were supposed to break him down, Jason." I tried Tiffany. I shoved him. I burned his phone. "What more do you want me to do?" "Beat him senseless." He is 70 years old. I want the money. It was the distraction I needed. They were turning on each other, the pressure of the lie and the looming audit cracking their unified front. I knew I did not have much time. I stood up, testing my weight on my bad leg. It held. I took my shoes off, moving in my socks to stay silent. I crept toward the stairs. The door to the basement, where the circuit breaker panel was located, was slightly ajar, but I ignored it. I did not need power. I needed communication. I climbed the stairs, slowly skipping the third step that I knew from experience always creaked. I reached the landing and looked down the hall. The door to the master bedroom was closed. The door to the guest room where I had broken the window was still barricaded, but the door to Mia's room was open just a crack. I slipped inside and pushed the door gently until it clicked shut. The room was a sanctuary of pink and white, filled with stuffed animals and the soft glow of a nightlight that was still on. Mia was on her bed, but she was not playing. She was curled up under a heavy quilt, a small lump in the center of the mattress. "Mia," I whispered. "It is Grandpa." The lump moved. Mia's head poked out from the covers. Her eyes were red and puffy. She had been crying. Seeing her like that broke my heart more than Jason's betrayal ever could. She was innocent collateral damage in her mother's war for greed. "Grandpa." She sniffled, sitting up. "Are you okay? I heard yelling last night." "Daddy was yelling." I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her into a hug. She felt tiny in my arms, trembling like a leaf. "I am fine, sweetie," I said, smoothing her hair. "We were just having a disagreement. Grown-up stuff." "Do not worry. Is Mom mad at you?" she asked, looking up at me with those big, intelligent eyes. "She said you are being selfish. She said you do not want to help us." I looked at the carving tools I had given her, which were sitting on her nightstand unopened. "Your mom is just stressed," I lied. "But listen to me, Mia. I need your help. I need you to be my partner on a secret mission. Can you do that?" She wiped her nose on her sleeve and nodded. "A mission. Like in your stories. Exactly like in the stories I said. But this one is real. I need to send a message to Uncle Stan. You remember Uncle Stan, right? The man who brings you the big chocolate bars?" She nodded again. "I need your iPad," I said. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the tablet. "Here, Grandpa." I took it and tapped the screen. It was locked. "What is the passcode, Mia?" "It is my birthday," she said. "But Grandpa Mom has it set up so she sees everything I do. If I download a game or send a message, she gets a ping on her phone. She says it is for safety." I froze. Of course she did. Tiffany was a control freak who monitored every digital footprint in this house. If I sent an email from Mia's account, Tiffany would know before I even hit send. I handed the tablet back to her. "Okay. We have to be smart," I said, thinking fast. My mind went back to the days on the construction site when we had to find workarounds for bad blueprints. "Do you know how to open the internet browser? Not the apps, just the web." "Yes," she said, tapping the Safari icon. "Good. Now I want you to type in this address. Do not use your email. We are going to use a special website." I dictated the address of a secure encrypted email service I used for high-level contracts. It was a login page. "Okay, Grandpa, I am there." "Log in," I said, reciting my old username and password from memory. It was a risk. If Tiffany had a keystroke logger, I was dead. But I had to trust that her surveillance was consumer grade, not CIA grade. The inbox loaded. It was empty. I never kept emails there. "Now, Mia, click on Compose. Do not put a name in the to box yet. Just type in the body of the message. Can you type fast?" "I am the fastest in my class," she whispered, a little bit of pride breaking through the fear. "Okay, type this exactly. Operation Bluebird." She typed, her small fingers flying over the glass. Operation Bluebird. Period. Code red. Code red. Period. Location Omega. Location Omega. What does that mean, Grandpa? It means the eagle is in the nest, but the wolves are at the door, I said. Now in the recipient line, type this address. I gave her Stan's personal encrypted email. It was a string of random numbers and letters at protonmail.com. Stan was paranoid. He was ex-military intelligence before he became a lawyer. He told me once that if I ever sent him those words, he would assume I was either dead or about to be, and he would bring hell with him. Ready, she asked, her finger hovering over the send button. Send it, I said, and then immediately delete it from the sent folder and clear the browser history. Can you do that? She nodded. Tap, 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 done. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The message was out. Bluebird. It was the name of the first project Stan and I worked on together 40 years ago. Code red meant immediate danger. Location Omega meant my current physical location or home base. Stan would know exactly where I was. Suddenly the doorknob turned. I grabbed the carving tools from the nightstand and shoved them under the pillow. I pushed the iPad under the covers. Lay down, I whispered. Mia flopped back onto the pillows and pulled the quilt up to her chin. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, clasping my hands together, as if I were in the middle of a sentence. The door swung open. Tiffany stood there. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a cup of coffee, but her eyes were alert, suspicious. She scanned the room, looking for the phone, looking for contraband. "What are you doing in here, Harold?" she demanded, walking into the room. I turned to her, keeping my face calm. "I am saying good morning to my granddaughter," I said. "Is that a crime now, too? Or does the $5 million debt cover visitation rights?" She narrowed her eyes. I heard talking. "What were you telling her?" "I was telling her a story," I said, "about a princess who was locked in a tower by a dragon who loved gold more than anything else in the world." Tiffany's lips thinned into a white line. She walked over to the bed and looked down at Mia. "Are you okay, sweetie?" she asked, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Is Grandpa bothering you?" "No, Mommy." Mia said, her voice small and trembling perfectly. "He is just telling me a story. It is a good one. The dragon is really scary." Tiffany looked at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of doubt. She reached out and smoothed Mia's hair. "Well, breakfast is ready," she said, straightening up. "And Harold, we have business to discuss. Jason is waiting in the study." I stood up. My hips screamed in protest, but I did not limp. I would not give her the satisfaction. "I will be right down," I said. I looked back at Mia. She winked at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. I smiled. My little ally. She had done it. Now all I had to do was survive until Stan got the message. And knowing Stan, he was probably already loading his shotgun. The second night in that house felt longer than a winter in the Arctic. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation with Jason and the secret mission with Mia had faded, leaving behind a cold exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. I was back in the guest room, the broken door propped shut with a heavy dresser I had dragged across the floor. The wind outside had not let up. It battered the siding of the house, searching for weakness, just like the people inside were searching for mine. Around 2 a.m, the pain arrived. It was not a sharp pain at first. It was a dull heaviness in the center of my chest, like a bag of wet cement had been placed on my sternum. I knew this feeling. I had lived with a heart condition for 10 years, a souvenir from decades of stress and job site coffee. It was angina. Usually it was manageable. A little rest and a little pill and the blood would flow again. I sat up on the edge of the bed, rubbing my chest. I needed my medication. I kept a small bottle of nitroglycerin in the inside pocket of my coat. I had left the coat on the bench in the entryway when I first arrived, but I remembered grabbing it when I went to the truck. I looked around the dark room. My coat was piled in the corner where I had tossed it after Jason shoved me. I stood up. The room tilted. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. I stumbled over to the coat, my hands shaking as I patted down the pockets. Keys, a few receipts, a stick of gum. Nothing. I checked the other side. Empty. I checked the inside breast pocket. Empty. Panic is a cold thing. It started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. I ripped the lining of the coat, searching desperately, hoping the bottle had just slipped through a hole. But there was no bottle. They had taken it. I leaned against the wall, fighting for air. My heart was fluttering now, a bird trapped in a cage beating its wings against the bars. I needed that medicine. Without it, the pressure would build until the muscle simply gave up. The door handle turned. The dresser scraped against the floor as someone pushed from the outside. I did not have the strength to hold it back. Tiffany stepped into the room. She was silhouetted by the hallway light, a shadow with a shape I had come to despise. She was holding something in her hand. She shook it. Rattle. Rattle. It was the sound of salvation. It was the sound of my pills hitting the plastic sides of the orange bottle. "Looking for this, Harold?" she asked. Her voice was casual, almost bored. I reached out my hand. "Give it to me, Tiffany. I need it." She took a step back, staying just out of reach. She was wearing that same silk robe, but her face was hard, drawn tight by sleeplessness and greed. "You do not look so good," she said, tilting her head. "You look a little pale. Is your chest tight? Is your left arm numb?" "Give me the medicine," I wheezed. She walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room and placed the bottle on it. Then she reached into her robe pocket and pulled out a document. It was a single sheet of paper, crisp and white. She placed it next to the bottle. Then she produced a pen. "It is a simple trade, Harold," she said. "One signature for one pill." I stared at the paper. Even in the dim light, I knew what it was. It was a power of attorney form. If I signed that, she would have control over everything. My bank accounts, my assets, my life. She could drain the $20 million before the sun came up. "You are insane," I whispered. "This is murder." "No," she said, shrugging. "This is negotiation. You have something I want. I have something you need. It is basic economics. Now sign the paper." My knees buckled. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. The pressure in my chest was growing, turning into a vice that was crushing my ribs. I gasped for air, my vision tunneling. "Please," I said. "Sign it," she commanded, pointing at the desk. "Get up and sign it, and the pain goes away. Or sit there and have a heart attack. It is your choice." Jason appeared in the doorway behind her. He looked at me huddled on the floor, and his eyes went wide. He saw his father dying. He saw the gray skin and the sweat beading on my forehead. "Tiff, oh, give him the pills," Jason said, his voice rising in panic. "He is having an attack." "He is fine, Jason," Tiffany snapped without looking back. "He is acting. He is a stubborn old mule playing for sympathy." "He is not acting," Jason shouted, pushing past her into the room. "Look at him. He cannot breathe." Jason rushed toward the desk, reaching for the orange bottle. "He was going to help me." For a second, I saw the son I knew. He was going to save his father. But Tiffany was faster. She spun around and swung her hand. Smack! The sound of the slap echoed like a gunshot in the small room. It caught Jason square on the cheek, snapping his head to the side. He stumbled back, holding his face shocked into silence. "Do not you dare!" she hissed, her face inches from his. "Do not you dare give him that bottle. We are so close, Jason. If you give it to him now, we lose everything. Do you want to go to jail? Do you want to be poor for the rest of your life?" Let him decide. Jason stood there frozen. His cheek was turning red. He looked at the bottle. He looked at his wife. And then he looked at me. I looked back at him. I was dying. I could feel the darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision. And yet my son did not move. He stood there paralyzed by a woman who had stripped him of his manhood. I turned my head to look at Tiffany. The pain was blinding now, a white-hot fire in the center of my chest. But through the pain, I felt a surge of something else. It was defiance. It was the same stubbornness that made me finish a roof in a thunderstorm because I promised the client it would be done. I looked her right in the eyes. I would rather die, I rasped, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. I would rather die right here on this floor than let you win. You will get nothing, Tiffany. Nothing. Her eyes widened. She had not expected that. She expected fear. She expected surrender. She did not expect a man who was willing to check out of this life just to spite her. Sign the paper, she screamed, losing her composure. Sign it, you old fool. I shook my head slowly. No. Then the room tilted sideways. The floor seemed to rush up to meet me. I let go. I stopped fighting the gravity. I let my body slump over, hitting the carpet with a heavy thud. I closed my eyes and let my breath rattle in my throat, a wet, ragged sound that signaled the end. It was not entirely acting. I was on the edge. But I pushed myself over that edge just enough to make it look final. Dad! Jason screamed. I lay still. I held my breath. Oh my God, Jason yelled. He is not breathing. Tiff, he is not breathing. Silence. Then I heard Tiffany's voice, but the confidence was gone. It was replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. He cannot die, she whispered. Not yet. The transfer is not done. If he dies now, the estate goes into probate. The lawyers will see everything. We will get nothing, Jason. Nothing. Wake him up, Jason shouted. Give him the pills. I heard the scramble of footsteps. I heard the bottle being snatched from the desk. Here she yelled. Here, take it! Something hard hit my chest. It was the bottle. She had thrown it at me. Take the pill, Harold, she screamed, her voice shrill with terror. Do not you dare die on me. Wake up. I waited another second, just to let the fear truly take root in her black heart. Then I groaned. I opened my eyes into slits. I reached out a shaking hand and grasped the bottle. I popped the cap. I shook 2 tiny white tablets into my palm and slid them under my tongue. The bitter taste was the best thing I had ever tasted. I leaned back against the wall, breathing heavily, letting the medicine do its work. The vice on my chest began to loosen. The blood started to flow. Tiffany was standing over me, breathing hard, her hands clenched into claws. She looked like she wanted to kick me, but she was too afraid that I might actually expire if she did. You are a monster, she spat. I looked up at her, holding the bottle tight in my hand. And you, I whispered, my voice gaining strength, are a failure. You tried to kill me and you could not even do that right. She let out a scream of frustration and stormed out of the room. Jason lingered for a moment, looking at me with a mixture of relief and shame, but he could not hold my gaze. He turned and followed his master, leaving me alone in the dark, with my life in my hands. I had survived. I had won the battle of the bottle. But the war was far from over. I knew that next time she would not make the mistake of letting me choose. Next time she would force my hand. And I had to be gone before that happened. The nitroglycerin had done its job. The crushing weight on my chest had subsided to a dull ache, a constant reminder of my mortality, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I sat in the darkness of the guest room listening to the house settle. It was 3 in the morning. The wind was still battering the eaves, a relentless assault that masked the smaller sounds of a prisoner plotting his escape. I was not going to wait for morning. Morning meant Monday. Monday meant the banks opened. Monday meant Tiffany would put a knife to my throat again, and this time she might not stop. I had to get out. I dragged myself off the floor and went to the window. Tiffany and Jason had done a thorough job of sealing me in. They had driven 3-inch framing nails through the sash and into the jamb, immobilizing the window completely. To an amateur, it would look impossible. A solid wall of glass and vinyl. But I am not an amateur. I am a builder. I looked past the vinyl cladding and saw the bones of the house. I remembered the specs for this subdivision. To save money, the developer had used soft white pine for the rough framing and the window bucks. Pine is cheap, it is plentiful, and most importantly, it is soft. You can drive a nail into pine easily, but you can also chew through it if you have time and the right tool. I took off my belt. It was heavy leather with a solid brass buckle, a square piece of metal with a sharp edge where the plating had worn off over decades of wear. It was not a chisel, but it was hard enough. I knelt by the windowsill. I found the spot where the nail head was buried deep in the wood. I pressed the corner of the buckle into the painted wood next to the nail. I pushed. The wood gave way. It was slow, agonizing work. Dig, twist, pry, dig, twist, pry. My fingers started to bleed, the skin tearing against the rough wood and the cold metal, but I did not stop. I worked with the rhythm of a man who has swung a hammer for 50 years. I focused on the grain of the wood, attacking the soft spots, avoiding the knots. An hour passed, then 2. The pile of wood shavings on the carpet grew. I had exposed the shanks of the 2 nails on the left side. I wedged the buckle underneath the sash and leveraged it against the sill. I pushed down with all my weight. Creak. The wood groaned. The nails bent. I pushed harder, ignoring the fire in my shoulder. Pop. The nails pulled free from the rotted pine. The left side of the window was loose. I repeated the process on the right side. My hands were cramping, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but the fear of dying in this room fueled me. Finally, the sash was free. I pushed it up. It slid open with the protest of friction and ice. The storm hit me instantly, a blast of sub-zero air carrying snow that stung my face like buckshot. I looked down. The drop was about 15 feet 5 meters of vertical death onto a concrete patio that was now covered in ice. But to the left, about 4 feet away, was the thick branch of an old oak tree. It was the same tree that used to annoy the roofers when we built this place, but now it looked like the hand of God reaching out to save me. If I could inch along the exterior molding, which was just a decorative ledge about 4 inches wide, I could reach that branch. I climbed onto the windowsill. The wind tried to push me back inside. I grabbed the vinyl siding, my fingers searching for purchase in the freezing plastic. I swung my legs out. The cold was a physical blow. It punched through my thin shirt instantly. My boots sought grip on the narrow ledge, which was slick with ice. I pressed my body flat against the house. "Don't look down, Harold," I whispered to myself. "Just look at the tree." I shuffled sideways. 1 inch, 2 inches. The wind roared, tearing at my clothes, trying to peel me off the wall. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with my medication and everything to do with the sheer terror of the fall. I was halfway to the tree. My fingers were numb. I could not feel the siding anymore. I was moving on instinct and muscle memory. Just 2 more feet. I could see the rough bark of the oak branch. It was swaying in the wind, a moving target. I coiled my muscles, preparing to jump. Click. The sound was louder than the wind. It was the sound of a heavy relay switch tripping. Suddenly, the world turned white. Twin floodlights mounted under the eaves exploded into life, blinding me. I squeezed my eyes shut against the glare, my grip on the siding faltering. I heard the back door slam open. Don't do it, Dad. The voice came from below. I squinted down through the blinding light and the swirling snow. Jason was standing on the patio. He was wearing a heavy parka and snow boots. In his hands, he held a metal baseball bat. He was not holding it like a son playing catch. He was holding it like a guard in a prison yard. "Get back inside," he shouted, his voice cracking over the wind. "Do not force me to do this." I looked at the tree. It was so close. But to reach it, I had to jump. And if I jumped, I would be vulnerable. Jason was right below me. If I missed the branch or if he swung that bat at my legs as I came down, I would be crippled. "You would hit your own father," I yelled down, my voice snatched away by the gale. "Go back inside!" Jason screamed, swinging the bat against the wooden support pillar of the porch. Whack! The sound was a violent promise. "I am not kidding, Dad. Tiffany is calling the police. She is going to tell them you are having a psychotic break and you are dangerous. If you come down here, I will defend myself." I looked at him and I saw the truth. He was terrified. He was a coward. But cowards with weapons are the most dangerous men on earth. I could not make the jump, not with him waiting, not with my frozen hands and my bad heart. I was beaten. I nodded slowly, letting him see my defeat. I began to shuffle backward toward the open window. "That is it," Jason yelled, lowering the bat slightly. "Just go back inside. We can talk in the morning." I reached the window. I threw one leg over the sill, but before I pulled myself back into my prison, I paused. I had one card left to play. It was not an ace, but it was something. My hand went to my waist. I unbuckled my belt completely, pulling the leather strap free from the loops. I held the heavy brass buckle in my hand. It was solid metal engraved with my initials, HF. I had worn it every day for 40 years. It was unique. It was identifiable. I looked past Jason toward the neighbor's yard. The fence was low. The neighbor's patio was just 20 feet away. They had a glass sliding door. I waited for the wind to gust. Jason was watching me, expecting me to climb in. He did not see my hand move. I wound up and threw the belt with everything I had left. It spun through the snowy air, a dark, heavy projectile. It cleared the fence. It sailed over the snow-covered hedge. Clang! It hit the neighbor's patio furniture, hard metal striking metal. The sound rang out sharp and dissonant in the night. Jason spun around. What was that? He ran toward the fence, trying to see what I had thrown. I did not wait to see if he found it. I pulled myself back into the room and slammed the window shut. I collapsed onto the floor, shivering violently, my body shaking from the cold and the adrenaline dump. I had failed to escape. I was still a prisoner, but I had planted a seed. That buckle was out there now. It was a piece of me in the outside world. And if the neighbor found it, if he saw the initials, he might remember the old man who lived next door. He might ask questions. I heard Jason running back into the house, pounding up the stairs. He was coming to nail the window shut again. He was coming to tighten the screws. Let him come. I curled up on the rug, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to warm my frozen blood. I had lost the battle, but I was still fighting the war. And as long as I was breathing, I still had a chance to bring this house down on top of them. Monday morning arrived with a silence that felt heavier than the storm. The blizzard had finally broken, leaving the world outside, buried under 2 feet of pristine white snow. But inside, the air was stale and suffocating. It was the deadline. The day the auditors would walk into Tiffany's office and open the books. The day the house of cards she had built would come crashing down unless she had my money to prop it up. I was sitting in the kitchen chair, where Jason had deposited me an hour earlier. My hands were tied loosely in front of me with a zip tie, not tight enough to cut circulation, but tight enough to remind me of my status. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. My chest was a dull, constant ache, a reminder of the heart attack I had faked and the real one that was waiting in the wings. Tiffany was pacing the kitchen floor. She was fully dressed in a sharp business suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a CEO ready for a board meeting, except for the wild, desperate look in her eyes and the way her hands kept twitching at her tones. She checked her watch for the 10th time in a minute. "The bank opens in 45 minutes, she muttered. "It is a 40-minute drive with the snow. We are running out of time." She stopped pacing and looked at me. Her eyes were cold, dead things. She walked over to the fruit bowl on the counter. She picked up a paring knife. It was a small knife with a black handle and a 3-inch blade curved like a claw. She tested the edge against her thumb. "Untie him, Jason," she said. Jason was leaning against the refrigerator drinking coffee, his face pale and unshaven. He looked at the knife and then at her. "Tiff, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I said untie him," she snapped. Jason walked over and cut the zip tie with a pair of kitchen shears. I rubbed my wrists trying to get the blood flowing. Tiffany walked up to me. She smelled of expensive perfume and fear. She placed the power of attorney document on the table in front of me. It was the same one from the bedroom, smooth and white. Next to it, she placed a heavy fountain pen. "Sign it," she said. I looked at the paper. I looked at Jason, who was staring at his feet. "I told you, Tiffany," I said, my voice raspy from dehydration. "I am not signing that. You can keep me here for a month. You can starve me. But I will not give you the keys to my life." She did not scream. She did not yell. She simply moved. In one fluid motion, she stepped behind me. She grabbed a handful of my gray hair and yanked my head back, exposing my throat. I gasped, staring up at the ceiling. Then I felt the cold bite of steel against my skin. She pressed the blade of the paring knife into the soft flesh under my jaw. It was sharp. I felt a sting, and then a warm trickle of blood ran down my neck, soaking into my collar. Jason shouted, "Tiff, stop!" "Shut up, Jason," she hissed right into my ear. Her breath was hot on my cheek. She pressed harder. "I am done playing games, Harold. I am done waiting. You think you are tough. You think you can outlast me. But you do not know what I am facing. If I do not walk into that bank with this paper signed, I go to prison for 20 years. Do you understand? My life is over." I felt the blade bite deeper. She was not bluffing. The desperation radiating off her was like heat from a furnace. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals kill. "Sign the paper," she whispered, "or I will open your throat right here in front of your son, and then I will forge your signature on your corpse. Do not test me." I looked at Jason. He was frozen, his eyes wide with horror, his hands covering his mouth. He was useless. He would watch her kill me, and then he would help her clean up the blood because he was too weak to stop her. I was alone, and I realized in that moment that I had pushed it as far as it could go. If I refused again, I died. And if I died, Tiffany might actually get away with it. She might forge the signature. She might bribe a notary. I had to live. To win, I had to live. "Okay," I croaked, trying not to swallow against the blade. "Okay, you win." She did not move the knife. "Say it again." "I will sign," I said. "I surrender. Just let me go." She held the knife there for another few seconds, letting the fear soak in. Then she released my hair and stepped back. She kept the knife pointed at my chest. "Do it," she said. "Now." I sat up, rubbing my neck. My hand came away red with blood. I looked at the blood on my fingers, and then I looked at the pen. I reached out my hand, trembling. It was not entirely an act. My body was in shock. I picked up the heavy pen. It felt like a lead weight. I looked at the document. It was a standard general power of attorney granting Tiffany Marie Foster full access to all accounts, assets, and legal decisions of Harold Edward Foster. It was a death warrant for my legacy. I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered over the signature line. "I need water," I whispered. "My mouth. I cannot focus." "Get him water," Tiffany barked. "But watch him." Jason scrambled to the tap and filled a glass. He brought it to me. I drank greedily, spilling half of it down my chin. It bought me 10 seconds. 10 seconds to remember the protocol. 10 years ago, when I sold the company and moved the bulk of my assets into the trust, I sat down with the bank manager in Zurich. He was a serious man named Herr Müller. We talked about security. We talked about kidnapping. We talked about extortion. "If anyone ever forces you to sign, Mr. Foster," he had said, "you need a tell. A signal that looks like a mistake to the untrained eye but screams duress to us." I remembered the signal. It was simple. It was subtle. And it was my only hope. I put the glass down. I gripped the pen. I let my hand shake violently. "Stop shaking," Tiffany snapped. "If it is illegible, the bank will reject it." "I am trying," I said. "I am an old man who has not eaten. Give me a second." I took a deep breath. I touched the pen to the paper. I wrote H. It was shaky, jagged. Arold. Then the last name. Foster. I finished the signature. It looked like the writing of a man in distress, which I was. But I had one more stroke to make. I went back to the first letter, the capital H. It was written in script with 2 vertical loops. On the second vertical loop, at the very bottom, where the line tailed off, I pressed down hard and made a sharp horizontal dash cutting through the tail. It looked like a slip of the pen, a twitch of a nervous hand. But to a verification algorithm, and to the eyes of a Swiss banker looking for discrepancies, it was a red flare fired into the night sky. It was the mark of coercion. I dropped the pen. "Done," I whispered, slumping back in the chair. Tiffany snatched the paper before the ink was even dry. She brought it up to her face, scanning it hungrily. She reached into her purse and pulled out my passport, which she had stolen from my bag earlier. She held the 2 signatures side by side. She looked at the loops. She looked at the slant. "It looks shaky," she muttered. "I had a knife to my throat," I said, closing my eyes. "What did you expect?" She looked at it again. She traced the letters with her eyes. She saw the resemblance. She saw the authenticity of the hand. She did not notice the tiny horizontal dash on the H. To her, it was just a smudge, an old man's tremor. "It will pass," she said, a smile breaking across her face for the first time in days. "It is close enough. They know you are old. They expect a little shake." She folded the document carefully and slid it into a leather portfolio. She checked her watch. "I am going," she said. "Jason, you stay here. Do not let him use the phone. Do not let him leave. If he tries anything, tie him back up." "I cannot tie up my dad again. Tiff." Jason said, his voice weak. "Do you want the money or not?" she asked, grabbing her keys. "Just sit there and watch him. I will be back in 2 hours with the transfer confirmation. And then we can figure out what to do with him." She looked at me one last time. There was no gratitude in her eyes, only contempt. "You should have just given it to me when I asked Harold," she said. "You made me do this." She turned and walked out the door. I heard the garage door open and the engine of her SUV roar to life. Then she was gone, speeding toward the bank, speeding toward the millions she thought were hers. I sat at the table, listening to the silence settle back over the house. My neck was stinging. My heart was tired. Jason stood by the sink, holding the knife she had left on the counter. He looked at me and then he looked at the knife. He picked it up and dropped it into the sink with a clatter. He couldn't even look at me. He thought it was over. He thought they had won, but I knew better. The paper she was carrying was not a check. It was a trap. and she had just walked right into it. The silence that filled the kitchen after Tiffany left was heavier than the blizzard that had buried us for 2 days. It was a silence made of regret, and the cold, hard realization that some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. I sat in the chair, my wrists still throbbing from the plastic ties, my neck stinging from the cut of the paring knife. I did not move. I did not try to struggle. I just watched my son. Jason was standing by the sink with his back to me. He was staring out the window at the white expanse of the front yard, where his wife's tire tracks were already being filled in by the drifting snow. His shoulders were slumped forward, as if the weight of his own spine was too much to bear. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He looked like a hollow shell of a man who had been scooped out and filled with someone else's poison. He turned on the tap and splashed water on his face. He did not dry it. He just let the drops fall from his chin onto his shirt, mixing with the sweat and the grime of 2 days of captivity. He turned around slowly and leaned against the counter. He could not meet my eyes. He looked at the floor. He looked at the refrigerator magnets. He looked at his own trembling hands. "Jason," I said. My voice was quiet. It was not the voice of a hostage. It was the voice of a father speaking to a child who has broken something valuable. He flinched as if I had thrown something at him. "Look at me, son," I said. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. There was no anger left in them, no greed, just a vast, terrifying emptiness. "Do you remember your graduation day?" I asked. He blinked, confused by the question. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He cleared his throat. "University of Illinois." I continued, keeping my gaze locked on his. "It was a hot day in June. You were sweating in that blue gown. You threw your cap in the air so high, I thought it was going to land on the roof of the stadium." Jason's chin quivered. A single tear escaped and tracked through the stubble on his cheek. "We went to dinner afterward," I said. "Just you and me and Mom. We went to that steakhouse you liked. You ordered a porterhouse, and you made a toast. Do you remember what you said?" He shook his head, a jerky mechanical motion. "You raised your glass," I said, my memory as sharp as the knife that had just been at my throat. "And you looked at me and you said, 'Dad, I am going to make you proud.' You said, 'I am going to be a man of honor just like you. I promise I will never take the easy way out.'" I paused, letting the memory hang in the stale air of the kitchen. What happened to that man, Jason? Where did he go? Jason made a sound that was half sob and half laugh. It was a broken, jagged noise. "That man never existed, Dad," he whispered. "That was just a kid who did not know how hard the world really was." He pushed himself off the counter and began to pace the small kitchen floor, his movements erratic and agitated. "You make it look so easy," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "You built an empire from nothing. Everyone in this town knows your name. Everyone respects Harold Foster. And then there is me, Jason the salesman. Jason the guy who cannot close a deal. Jason who has to borrow money from his dad just to pay the rent." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his face twisted with a lifetime of inadequacy. "I tried, Dad. I really tried. But I am not you. I do not have your hands. I do not have your gut. I fail at everything I touch. And Tiffany, she saw that. She knew I was weak. She told me I deserved more. She told me the world owed me because I was your son." He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at the roots. "I was jealous," he confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame. "I was jealous of your success. I was jealous of your money. I hated that you sat on a fortune while I drowned in debt. I wanted to be the big man for once. I wanted to be the one who saved the family. And she told me this was the only way." I looked at him, and I did not see a villain. I saw a tragedy, I saw a boy who had measured his worth by the wrong yardstick his entire life. Jason, I said softly, I never cared about the money. I sold the company because I was tired of the money. I did not want you to be rich. I wanted you to be happy. Happy, he scoffed, wiping his eyes. How can you be happy when you are a failure? Failure is okay, son, I said, leaning forward as much as the chair would allow. Everyone fails. I failed 3 times before Foster Construction made a profit. I lost jobs. I lost friends. Failure is just part of the work. It is how you learn. I looked at the cut on my hand, where the wood of the window frame had torn my skin. Failure is forgivable, Jason. But selling your soul, giving up your integrity for a shortcut, there is no coming back from that. You cannot buy your honor back. Not for $20 million. Not for all the money in the world. Jason stopped moving. He stood in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by the stainless steel appliances he could not afford in the house he did not own. He looked at me, and for the first time in days, the fog in his eyes seemed to clear. He saw me, not as an obstacle, not as a bank account, but as his father. He looked at his hands. He looked at the zip ties binding my wrists. Oh God, he whispered. What have I done? The reality of his actions crashed down on him. He had held his father hostage. He had watched his wife hold a knife to my throat. He had become everything he promised he would never be. He let out a long, shuddering breath. He walked over to the drawer where the kitchen shears were kept. He pulled them out. I watched him approach me. He was not menacing anymore. He was defeated. I am sorry, Dad, he said, his voice barely audible. I am so sorry. I cannot do this anymore. He knelt beside my chair. His hands were shaking so badly he had trouble lining up the blades of the shears with the plastic tie. Hold still, he whispered. I am going to get you out of here. We will call the police. I will tell them everything. I will tell them it was me. I will take the fall. I looked down at the top of his head. He was going to try to fix it. It was too late to save himself, but he was trying to save me. It was a small spark of redemption, but it was there. He squeezed the handles. Snip! The plastic tie fell away. I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood rush back into my hands. Jason reached for my arm to help me up. Just then, the silence was shattered. Ring! Ring! The landline phone on the wall screamed. It was a jarring, intrusive sound that made both of us jump. Jason froze his hand, still gripping my arm. Ring! Do not answer it, I said. He looked at the phone. He looked at me. It is her, he said. He stood up and walked to the wall. He picked up the receiver. Hello? He did not put it on speaker, but he did not have to. Tiffany's voice was so loud, so shrill, that I could hear every word from where I sat. She was screaming. It was the sound of a woman whose world has just evaporated. It is a trap, Jason. It is a trap, Runt, and Jason's face went pale. What? What are you talking about? The account, she shrieked. It is frozen, they knew. The teller looked at the signature and hit a silent alarm. There are police cars pulling up right now. They are surrounding the bank. Jason stood there, the phone trembling against his ear. Get out of the house, Tiffany screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. Get out now! Leave him! Just run! Don't let them catch you! She was still giving orders. Even as the handcuffs were probably being slapped on her wrists, she was still trying to control him, still trying to drag him down with her. Jason lowered the phone slowly. He did not hang up. He just let it drop from his hand. It swung back and forth on its cord, hitting the wall with a dull, rhythmic thud. Tiffany's voice was still coming from it, tinny and distant, screaming for him to run. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with panic. She said the police are at the bank, he stammered. She said they knew. I stood up, rubbing my sore hip. I told you, son, I said. I told you I would not let her win. Jason backed away from me. He looked at the back door. He looked at the car keys on the counter. The instinct to flee was taking over. I have to go, he whispered. I have to go. He took a step toward the keys, and then we heard it. Woo! It was faint at first, a low, mournful wail carried on the winter wind, but it was getting louder, and it was coming from the wrong direction. The bank was 5 miles south in the town center. The sound was coming from the north, from the highway. Jason stopped. He tilted his head, listening. Woo! Woo! It was not one siren. It was many. A chorus of them overlapping, growing in intensity with every passing second. They were moving fast. That is not coming from the bank, Jason said, his voice barely a breath. No, I said, walking over to the window. I pulled back the curtain. Far down the long, snowy driveway, through the bare branches of the trees, I could see them. Blue and red lights flashing against the white snow. They were cutting through the gray morning like knives. They were not heading to town. They were turning onto our street. Stan got the email, I said quietly. Jason rushed to the window. He saw the lights. He saw the convoy of vehicles, police cruisers, and a black SUV that I knew belonged to Stan's private security detail, tearing through the snowdrifts. They are coming here, he said. He turned to me, terror seizing his features. Dad, what do I do? I looked at my son. I saw the fear. I saw the ruin of his life approaching at 60 miles an hour. He could run. He could try to make it to the woods behind the house. He might get a few miles before the cold or the dogs got him. Or he could stay. He could face the music. He could stop running from his mistakes. It is time to stop running, Jason, I said. It is time to be the man you promised me you would be. The sirens were deafening now. The tires crunched on the gravel of the driveway. Doors slammed. Voices shouted commands. Jason looked at the back door one last time. Then he looked at me. He slumped his shoulders. He closed his eyes and let out a long, defeated sigh. He turned around and placed his hands on the kitchen counter, spreading his fingers wide. I am sorry, Dad, he whispered as the heavy boots hit the front porch. I walked over and stood beside him. I put my hand on his shoulder. I know, son, I said. Then the front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the foundations of the house. The wood of the doorframe shattered, sending splinters flying across the hallway like shrapnel. A battering ram had done in 1 second what Jason had been dreading for 2 days. Men in tactical gear poured into the foyer, their voices overlapping in a wall of controlled chaos, shouting commands that bounced off the high ceilings. Police, get on the ground. Hands where we can see them. Jason did not resist. He dropped to his knees, instantly lacing his fingers behind his head, his face pressing into the cold tile of the kitchen floor. He did not look like a conspirator anymore. He looked like a child trying to hide from a thunderstorm. Behind the wall of uniformed officers, a figure emerged from the snowy mist outside. It was Stan Kowalski. He was 68 years old, but he walked with the kinetic energy of a man half his age. He was wearing a heavy wool coat over a Kevlar vest, and his eyes scanned the room with the precision of a hawk hunting field mice. He spotted me standing by the counter. Secure the hostage, Stan barked at the private security team flanking him. 2 large men moved toward me, but I held up a hand. I am fine, Stan, I said, my voice steady despite the ringing in my ears. I am walking out of here on my own 2 feet. Stan nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin. He walked over to Jason, who was being cuffed by a deputy. Stan looked down at my son with a mixture of disgust and pity. You have the right to remain silent, Stan recited, his voice grinding like gravel. But I suggest you start talking while you still have a tongue, because your wife just drove a getaway car into a police blockade and blamed the whole thing on you." Jason looked up, his eyes wide. She blamed me." Before Stan could answer, tires screeched in the driveway. A car engine roared, revving high and angry. Then a crash as a vehicle slammed into the back of a police cruiser, blocking the drive. Tiffany. She had not been caught at the bank. She had run, and like a rabid animal returning to its den, she had come back. Not to save Jason. Not to save Mia. She had come back for me. She had come back to finish what she started, because in her twisted mind, I was the only loose end that mattered. Officers shouted outside. Weapons were drawn. The front door, which was hanging off its hinges, was kicked open again. Tiffany stumbled into the hallway. She was a wreck. Her hair was wild, her expensive coat torn. She was not holding a weapon, just her car keys clutched in her hand like a dagger. Her eyes were manic, darting around the room until they locked on me. "You!" she screamed, lunging forward. "You ruined everything!" She did not get 3 steps. Stan's security detail moved like a steel wall. One of them caught her arm, spinning her around. She flailed, screaming obscenities, kicking and scratching, but she was no match for professionals. They slammed her against the wall, pinning her there. An officer moved in, snapping the cuffs on her wrists with a metallic finality. I walked out of the kitchen. I smoothed the front of my wrinkled shirt and buttoned my cardigan. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a cold clarity. I walked up to Tiffany. She was panting, her cheek pressed against the drywall, her eyes burning with hate. "You set me up," she hissed. You knew the bank would flag it." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had held a knife to my throat, who had threatened my granddaughter. "I did not set you up, Tiffany," I said quietly. "You set yourself up the moment you decided that money was worth more than family." She laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Family," she spat. "You were sitting on a Fortune Herald, $20 million, and you watched us struggle. You watched us drown. You deserved this. You owed us." I shook my head slowly. "You think 20 million is a lot?" I asked. She stared at me, confused by the question. "That account was just my retirement fund," I said. "It was my rainy day money. The bulk of my estate, the real wealth from the sale of the company, is in a diversified trust." I leaned in closer so she could hear every word. "I had an appointment with my lawyers next week, Tiffany. I was setting up a venture capital fund. $50 million. I was going to put Jason in charge of it. I was going to give you the keys to the kingdom. I wanted to see you succeed. I wanted to give you everything." Her face went slack. The hate drained away, replaced by a dawn of absolute horror. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "50 million, she whispered. I nodded. "But you could not wait, could you?" I said. "You had to take it. You had to steal it. And now you have nothing." I turned away from her. I could hear her starting to sob, a low, keening wail of regret that had nothing to do with conscience and everything to do with greed. "Take her away," Stan said. The officers hauled her out the door. She dragged her feet, screaming my name, begging for a second chance, begging for a deal. I did not look back. I walked over to where Jason was being pulled to his feet. He was cuffed, his hands behind his back. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. He looked like a boy again, a boy who had broken a window and was waiting for his punishment. "Dad," he choked out. "Dad, I am so sorry." I stood in front of him. I reached out and adjusted his collar, which was twisted. I brushed a speck of dust off his shoulder. "I know you are son," I said. "Please," he whispered. "Please tell them. Tell them I tried to stop her. Tell them I untied you." I looked at the officer holding his arm. "Officer," I said, "I am not pressing charges for the kidnapping." Jason let out a breath, his knees buckling with relief. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you." But I continued, my voice hardening. "I cannot help you with the embezzlement, Jason." Jason froze. "If you knew what she was doing with the company money, if you signed those tax returns, if you spent a dime of that stolen cash, then that is between you and the federal government. I will not shield you from the consequences of your greed." Jason stared at me. He saw the line I had drawn. I would save him from his wife, but I would not save him from himself. "I understand," he whispered, his head dropping to his chest. "Good luck, son," I said. The officer led him away. I watched him go, watched him walk out into the snow and into the back of a squad car. It felt like watching a part of myself die. But a cancerous limb must be cut off to save the body. I turned to Stan. He was watching me, his face grim. "Where is the girl?" Stan asked. "Upstairs," I said. I walked past the wreckage of the living room, past the fireplace where my phone lay melted in the ashes. I climbed the stairs one last time. My hip ached with every step, but I did not stop. I pushed open the door to Mia's room. She was sitting on the bed, wrapped in her quilt, her eyes wide and terrified. She had heard the screaming. She had heard the crash. "Grandpa," she whispered, "is the dragon gone?" I walked over and sat beside her. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight. "Yes, sweetie," I said. "The dragon is gone. The knights came and took her away." "Where are Mom and Dad?" she asked, her voice muffled against my chest. "They have to go away for a while," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They did some bad things, and they have to go to a timeout. A long timeout." "Who is going to take care of me?" she asked, pulling back to look at me. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in days. "I am," I said. "We are going to go on an adventure, you and me." I stood up and held out my hand. She took it. She slid off the bed, still clutching her quilt. I saw the box of carving tools peeking out from under her pillow. "Grab your tools, Mia," I said. "You are going to need them." She grabbed the box and held it to her chest. We walked out of the room together. We walked down the stairs, past the broken door, past the police officers taking photos of the crime scene. We walked out onto the porch. The air was cold and crisp. The storm was over. The sun was shining on the snow, blindingly white and pure. Stan was waiting by his black SUV. He opened the back door. "Ready, Harold?" he asked. I lifted Mia into the car. I buckled her seatbelt. Then I climbed in beside her. I looked back at the house one last time. It was a beautiful house on the outside, a monument to success. But inside it was rotten. It was a cage. "Drive Stan," I said. As the car pulled away, crunching over the snow, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor. I had lost my son, but I had saved the only thing in that house worth saving. And as Mia leaned her head against my shoulder, I knew that my real work, the work of building a legacy, was just beginning. 6 months have passed since the blizzard that nearly cost me my life, and the silence of winter has been replaced by the humming of cicadas and the warmth of a June sun. I am sitting on the edge of a dock, my legs dangling over the cool water of Lake Geneva. It is a long way from the drafty cabin I used to call home, and an even longer way from the prison cell my son's house had become. The legal storm cleared up faster than I expected, mostly because Stan Kowalski does not believe in leaving loose ends. The trial was short and brutal. Tiffany did not get the plea deal she wanted. The state prosecutor looked at the evidence, the embezzlement from her firm, and the kidnapping of a 70-year-old man, and he threw the book at her. She got 10 years in federal prison. I was there when they read the verdict. She did not look at me. She just stared straight ahead, her face a mask of stone, refusing to show weakness, even as the bailiffs led her away. She never apologized. She never admitted she was wrong. Until the very end, she believed she was the victim of a cruel world that refused to give her what she thought she was owed. Jason fared better, but only slightly. Because he untied me and because he cooperated with the investigation into the stolen funds, he avoided prison time. He got 5 years of probation and a criminal record that ensures he will never work in sales again. He lost the house. He lost the BMW. He lost every shred of the fake status he had built his life around. I drove past a construction site in downtown Chicago last week. I stopped my truck and watched from across the street. Jason was there. He was wearing a neon vest and a hard hat, pushing a wheelbarrow full of wet concrete. He was sweating. He looked exhausted. He looked miserable. But for the first time in his life, he was earning an honest dollar. I did not honk. I did not wave. I just watched him for a minute, and then I drove away. I do not pay his rent. I do not buy his groceries. He is learning the lesson I should have taught him 20 years ago. If you want to eat, you have to work. It is a hard lesson to learn at 38, but it is better late than never. My focus now is entirely on Mia. She lives with me in a new house I bought, a sprawling ranch-style place with a big workshop in the back. I set up the Mia Protection Trust the day after the trial. It is an ironclad legal fortress. It pays for her private school, her clothes, her dance lessons, and her therapy. It ensures she will never want for anything. But there is a catch. Jason cannot touch a penny of it. Not for rent, not for gas, not for a cup of coffee. If he wants to see his daughter, he has to come to my house, and he has to be sober. He visits on Sundays. We do not talk much. He sits in the living room and watches Mia carve wood in the workshop with me. He looks at us, and I see the regret in his eyes. He knows what he threw away. Stan is sitting next to me on the dock, a fishing pole in his hand, a cold beer in the other. He looks younger now that the case is closed. He casts his line into the water, the reel singing a high-pitched zip. "So Harold," he says, keeping his eyes on the bobber floating in the ripples, "do you regret it?" I look at him. Regret what? "Calling in the cavalry," Stan says. "Sending your son to rock bottom. You could have bailed him out. You have the money. You could have paid off the debt and hushed it all up." I take a sip of my iced tea. I think about the knife at my throat. I think about the look on Jason's face when he threw my phone into the fire. I could have, I admit. I could have written a check and saved his reputation. I could have let him keep playing pretend in that big house. But that would not have been love, Stan. That would have been complicity. Stan nods slowly. He understands. He has seen enough of the world to know that sometimes you have to break a bone to reset it properly. "Are you sad, though?" he asks, turning to look at me. "He is your boy. It has to hurt." I look out across the lake. The water is blue and calm, reflecting the white clouds drifting overhead. I think about the empty chair at my dinner table where my son used to sit. I feel the ache of that absence, and I know it will never fully go away. "I lost a son," I say, my voice quiet. "That is true. The boy I raised is gone, and the man he became is a stranger to me. I mourn him every day. I reel in my line, checking the bait. But I look at it this way, Stan. I made a trade. A terrible, painful trade. I lost a son who was already lost, but I saved a granddaughter who still had a chance." I gesture back toward the house where Mia is sitting on the porch swing, reading a book in the sunlight. She is safe. She is happy. She is learning that value comes from what you create, not what you steal. I saved her from becoming them, I say. I broke the cycle. If I had given them that money, they would have ruined her. They would have turned her into another Tiffany, entitled and empty. Now she has a chance to be real. She has a chance to be good. Stan smiles and tips his beer toward me. That is a hell of a return on investment, Harold, he says. It is, I agree. It is the best deal I ever made. We sit in silence for a while, watching the water, waiting for a bite. The sun is warm on my face. For the first time in a long time, I feel light. The burden of the secret is gone. The burden of the lie is gone. People always say that money changes people. They say it corrupts them. They say it makes them greedy. But I do not think that is true. Money is just a tool, like a hammer or a saw. It does not have a will of its own. Money does not change people. It just turns up the volume on who they already are. It peels back the layers of politeness and necessity and shows you the raw core underneath. It is a magnifying glass for the soul. I thought my money was a curse when Tiffany found that bank statement. I thought it was the thing that destroyed my family. But now I realize it was a gift. It was the fire that burned away the rot. It lopsided the foundation so I could see where the cracks were. It stripped the masks off the people I loved and showed me their true faces. It was painful. It was ugly. But it was the truth. And I am glad I saw it before it was too late. I cast my line back into the water. The lure splashes, breaking the surface. I am Harold Foster. I am 70 years old. I have $20 million in the bank and a family that is broken and stitched back together in a new shape. But I have my honor. I have my granddaughter. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly who is sitting at my table. And that is worth every single penny. This story reminds us that money is merely a tool that reveals a person's true character. Harold Foster proved that integrity is worth more than any fortune. While his son and daughter-in-law allowed greed to destroy their lives, Harold showed that true strength lies in standing up for what is right, even when it breaks your heart. Family is not defined by blood, but by respect and love. By saving his granddaughter, Harold secured a legacy far greater than his millions, proving that the most important inheritance we can leave behind is a life lived with honor. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more life-changing tales. What would you have done in Harold's shoes? Would you have called the police on your own son? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.